Good evening all, and welcome to this dark and rainy night. I hope you're ready, because we have some very scary stories in store. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This story happened when I was around 10 years of age, and involved 4 of my childhood friends. I am a female, and I'm from a very country southern state. This was the most awful thing I've been through in my life. This story takes place back in the mountains. I was always so excited to see the weekend approaching, partly because I had a very cool mum who would take me places with my friends and pretty much let us have a bit of freedom. The other part is I always get to spend weekends with my friends. So my friend Belinda asked me if she could come spend the weekend with me. I asked my mother, who approved, and I waited until her mother dropped her off at the bottom of my hill and walked down to meet her. We walked excitedly back to my house, and my mum then said to her best friend Chris, who is female, so my mum asked if Belinda and I wanted to go, and we both said yes. Chris's kids are Alan and Jay, who happen to be 2 of my best friends. Belinda had a crush on Alan, and I was secretly in love with Jay. We left our house, and within 10 minutes, descended into their home. As I said, I live on top of a huge mountain that is very close to dense forest. So after 20 minutes of driving, we finally made it to their house. My mom went in and was greeted by Chris. Belinda and I stayed out to talk with Ellen and Jay, who also had a few other friends with them. We knew everyone there and also joined the conversation. Scott being the oldest, Jay being the second oldest, Ray and then Alan being the youngest. They all kept going on about this cabin they had built far into the woods. It was probably about 3 miles into the forest from their house. The boys wanted us to go down with them to explore it, and we agreed. I was used to roaming half of these woods, and I always loved venturing out into them. I grew up there my whole life, and that all changed after this. We told them we had to ask my mum and use the bathroom before we could go. They sniggered, jumped on their ATVs, screamed that they were going on ahead of us, and tell us to follow when we're done. We go into the house, use the restroom, and ask my mum if we could go. We're in a hurry to catch the boys, and she told us yes, but to be careful. So we race out of the house. We start walking down their hill to descend to the main dirt road. We had to walk approximately half a mile to get to the road that led to the cabin. It was almost all downhill, except for the flat, mainly bottom road. We skipped along merrily, talking about the guys as we were going. They always liked playing pranks and jokes on me, since I was like their little sister and grew up with them. So I told Belinda that I had a feeling that they were going to jump out and scare us or something. Little did I know I was in for a different surprise. We walked around another 2.5 miles to finally reach this cabin. It felt like it took forever, as this wasn't a road but a path. When we finally reach it, no one was in sight. We walk onto the little porch and knock on the door, waiting for one of the guys to jump out and try and scare us. We step back and marvel at the little cabin. Jay did a really good job on it. He was always into building, creating and growing things. We finally check the door and step into a little room. The cabin only had 2 rooms. It wasn't very big at all. No one appeared to be inside or in the general area. All we can hear are the sounds of wildlife. So we stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what to do. It was then that we heard the ATV a little ways away above the cabin. Not back towards the main road, but further down the path. So we follow the sounds and finally see the guys. They're speeding off down the path. Stop long enough to yell at us and keep following them though, and take off down the path of the woods. We both groan very loudly. Belinda expresses concern and just wants to go back the way we came to the house. It was probably around 3 in the afternoon, and she didn't want to be out in the woods anymore. I, on the other hand, was a little explorer and wanted to keep going down the path, thinking somehow that we could find the guys and possibly prank them. Boy, do I regret doing that now. In fact, I think I should have kicked their butts after this little escapade. So we take off further down the path, after I talk Belinda into it. We walk for 2 hours before we both realize that we are lost. We came to a fork in the roads. There stood a tree with 2 arrows pointing to either side of the split in the road. I forgot to mention that it was summertime and the daylight was strong. It doesn't get dark here until around 8ish in the summer, and we had walked for about 2 hours in total, and seriously didn't know which way to go. My friend started to panic a bit, and I tried to calm her down, assuring her that we had plenty of daylight ahead, and that we would make it back in plenty of time, although I wasn't so sure of that. We were about 7 miles into the woods that were endless. At this time, I had no idea of our location, so we both decided to stick towards the right of the mountain. So we took off. Belinda was laughing and saying she was going to kick their butts later. I laughed, and we made a plan to get back at them. We walked for what seemed like forever, and somehow ended up back at the split in the road. It was then growing a little darker, nearing dusk with every minute. By this time, my friend and I were totally freaking out. She was sobbing and asking me, how are we going to find our way back? I tried to stay calm and reassure her that we would make it back, but on the inside, I was just as scared as her. And that time, we stood frozen to the road, trying to figure out where to go next. That's when about 15 yards back, I heard a twig snap. I shushed Belinda and asked her if she heard that. She started smiling and was about to call out for our guy friends. I stopped her suddenly, telling her to stay quiet for a minute. We continued to hear the footsteps. For some reason, I felt more terrified than I ever had in my life. I whispered to Belinda to start walking slowly down the left fork. The footsteps kept inching closer to our location. We tried to be as quiet as we could, but leaves were all under us. For some reason, I knew that these footsteps didn't belong to our friends, and I had the awful feeling of dread, and my friend started to pick up on that. As the footsteps started sounding closer and faster, I decided to book it down this path, and my friend followed suit. I just felt I was running for my life, and that if I slowed down, I was going to never make it back home. We finally reached this embankment off the side of the path, so we decided to climb up it, and I tore into the mountainside with my feet and my legs and scratched myself along the way. We finally could see the barn up ahead of us, which was old and had not been used in a long time. The footsteps still approached us after a short pause. My guess is they were quieter as they reached the mountain. We had also descended into tall grassy fields, which made it easier to mask any sounds. As I finally realized our surroundings, I remembered their family grave was up ahead of the barn. It was very old, and had very old large headstones, as well as some crypts. I decided that was probably our best chance to hide, and get a view of who this person was who was chasing us. So we ran through the old iron gate and hid behind the largest tomb we could find. It grew very quiet as we stood frozen in the graveyard. My mind was racing, my body was shaking, and my heart was beating beyond control. Who was chasing us through the woods? What did they want from us? I had so many questions. Questions that would never get answered. Belinda and I sat there for what seemed like an eternity, but it was more like 10 minutes. It gave us a chance to calm down, correct our breathing, and cool down from our run. We finally decided to stand up halfway, so that we could see if anyone were around us. We crept up to our feet, still crouching behind the grave. What we both saw, literally, made us pee our pants. There, at the beginning of the cemetery, stood a man. He was probably around 6 foot tall and appeared to weigh somewhere in the region of 170 pounds, and was wearing dark clothing. His eyes looked very dark and wild as he stood there searching the graveyard with his eyes, trying to listen for us. We both immediately ducked back behind the headstone. We started breathing heavily again, scared to death he saw us raise. Belinda shot me a look as the man started rustling around. I peered up again, and his gaze met mine. He then turned his body towards our hiding place, locked his gaze with me, and smiled a wicked smile. He then said, "There you are." I didn't even hesitate. I screamed to Belinda, and we both jumped up and started running towards the back of the cemetery fence. The man started chasing behind us. Luckily for us, this cemetery had a very short fence, so we hurriedly hopped over and began running in the direction of the house. We ran out of the clearing and reached the gravel road. We didn't slow down, stop, or look behind us. We just ran as fast as we could towards the house. The gravel beneath our feet was very loud. We made it part way there and at the bottom of their road. At that point we saw all the boys looking very worried. We ran up to them so fast that they jumped. I ran into Scott's arms crying, with Belinda right beside me. She was crying too, both of us looking a hot mess, bleeding from the climb earlier, sweaty, and our appearance disheveled. We suddenly turned, remembering the reason for our panic, to see a man running towards the graveyard. Scott, Jay, and Alan, all screaming, chase after him, and we never saw him again. The boys chased him into the woods and couldn't catch up with him, so they came back and walked us up to the house, and they all started crying, feeling very bad for trying to mess with us earlier. Our parents waiting on us scared to death. Jay and the boys admitted to leaving us and taking off into the woods, thinking that we would find our way back. As it grew later, they all began to worry about us and had gone back to search for us. But when they couldn't find us, they all went to our parents and admitted what they did. They all went to search for us and began to panic when they couldn't find us. Chris was actually on the phone with 911 when we arrived, and they were about to send search and rescue down. We had been gone for close to 5 hours, and we told them the story about the man who followed us. The police showed up to question us and ask us for the man's description, and they searched through the woods and mountains, but there wasn't a trace of him. The boys all got grounded for playing their trick. They honestly were all shaken up by it, thinking that they would never see us again, and scared because it was getting dark, and of course because of the man. They felt guilty thinking about him, and thought it was all their fault. Needless to say, we forgave them. I never went back to that cabin, or to any of that part of the woods again. So, creepy woodsman stalker, I hope we never meet again. I decided to go smoke a couple of joints with some of my friends from a rural town nearby, and agreed to drive about 40 minutes out of their town to explore an abandoned and haunted house. It was a cloudy day, and the old farm had an odd energy. I'm pretty sensitive to those things, and I was the only girl. But I grew up with boys, and I don't show fear in front of people often, especially when they're waiting to get a reaction out of me. We got out of the car, smoked a joint, and lit up cigarettes and whatnot. We walked into the first building, a dilapidated barn, and I climbed the ladder, being the lightest and thinking I'm invincible, as all of us young people do. It was neat. The floor of the hayloft had caved in, but some hay bales were still intact, and you got the vintage farming style feeling. Then we walked to the white farmhouse. I don't remember much, because I stepped in the front door, and everything was dark, except the front room, directly to our right. I took one step inside the room, and froze as my friends walked around me to get into the room. The walls had once been white, but they were covered, completely covered, with pentagrams, upside down crosses, God knows what creepy shit staining the walls. I'm no expert, but there were what was definitely multiple blood stains on the plain wood floors, as well as splashed a bit on a couple of areas of the wall. The wood was also covered with paint, spray paint, and scratchings and carvings, and a fine layer of syringes, plastic tourniquets and needles. I've never been more completely blindsided by the sense of evil in that room. The edges of my vision went black, and there was a whomp whomp going on in my ears that was way more intense than whatever my heart was doing. I can guarantee I missed a couple of beats. I backed out of that room, backed out of the front door running into the frame, and turned and ran for the car and chain smoked until the rest finished with their exploration. Screw that place. I worked overnight at McDump's because it was generally quiet and the pay was good. The restaurant was open 24 hours, both drive-through and the indoor seating area. There was a gas station at the far end of the building, with only one employee working overnight. We were out in the middle of nowhere, about 10 minutes from the nearest town, which had a population of about 450 people. Highway patrol didn't even bother patrolling the roads out where we were. It was so far out. The one time we had an injury bad enough to call an ambulance, it took them 35 minutes to reach us, You know, people die in that time. So, not the best place to be working the graveyard shift. Towards the end of my employment there, we had many employees quit, and most of them were our overnight team. At one point, we were down to myself and 3 managers who work rotating shifts to cover the overnight, with only 2 people working overnight at any given time, plus the 1 employee over at BP, meaning 3 people in this building. I generally worked as front counter, food prep, and cleaning whilst my manager did paperwork, and God only knows what the poor lonely soul at BP got up to. One night, creep number 1 comes in and looks at the newspaper at BP, but doesn't purchase one. He comes over to the seating area, sits down, and just sits there. 15 minutes later, I ask if he's alright and if he needs any help. He responds, "I'm just enjoying the view," which is really strange considering it's almost 2 AM and raining outside, and you can't see anything from where he's sitting except the front counter, McCafe, and the fryers. An hour later, he's still sitting there. I've almost forgotten about him. He's just sitting quietly staring. My manager comes up and tells me he's going out through the back door to have a quick smoke with the girl from BP. Cool, no problems. Happens all the time. As soon as they walk through the kitchen, the man stands up and orders a slice of toasted banana bread and starts up some small talk. "Have you been here long tonight?" "Uh-huh, since 9. "When's your shift finish?" Around 7. "Why?" "Oh, they work you really hard, don't they?" "Yep." "Is someone else coming to help out?" In a couple of hours, I guess." This is the point where I start really panicking. People seem to think talking about long hours on overnights is new and inventive small talk. We get it all the time. But when he asks, "Do you have a security guard?" I started to panic. Yeah, he does another location down the road and comes around occasionally. Lie. Which the guy would know is a lie because he'd been sitting there for over an hour. The guy starts to walk behind the counter of the cafe as I'm making his banana bread, and I'm full of panic, as our cafe is the only one right next to the entrance and exit, and he's blocking it, and there's nobody but me in the building currently. The cash register isn't even in the area, so I've got no idea what he wants. "It's only you and the manager working here tonight, isn't it?" "Nope, there's a cleaner in the back. He's cleaning the freezer tonight." That was a lie as well. "What nights are you working this week?" I've got the rest of the week off, sorry." Also a lie. At this point, my manager walks back in, and we can hear him laughing with the girl from BP, but not see them, and they can't see us. The creepy dude hightails it out of there, leaving behind his toasted banana bread and coffee, and wasn't seen again that night. A couple of weeks later, he comes back with 2 other shady looking guys. They all order food. My manager is in the back doing paperwork as usual. They pay for their food, and I let them know how long it's going to be, ask them to take a seat, and go to start cooking it. Next thing I know, one of them is behind the counter, just having a look around. I let him know he's not supposed to be there, and he nonchalantly walks back. So I do the only sensible thing and alert the manager, while I'm cooking the food. He gets the same grilling that I got, but now with things like how much money the store makes thrown in. One of the guys knocks over a mop bucket, and my manager starts to clean it up. Just in time for one of the other guys to walk into the kitchen again. I calmly tell him to leave, and he walks through the kitchen to the employee-only door. and the three of them leave, without their food, without another word. I don't even know how he knew the employee-only door was there. A few days later, shady guy number 2 comes back, steals a muffin, and walks out. About a week after that, shady guy number 3 comes through tripping on drugs and makes a scene about not receiving tomato slices on his burger, which wasn't supposed to have tomato slices in it anyway. So we give him some tomato slices to shut him up and kick him out. Now, the entire time these adventures have been going on, our managers have been saying, "It's alright, they're just weird. They're not actually going to try anything, you're just being paranoid." Cue another couple of weeks of them coming in at random times of the night. Sometimes sitting around for an hour not doing anything, sometimes asking questions, but almost always ordering food and leaving without it, when the manager comes around. And then I ran into creep number 1 at the mall where I live, 45 minutes from the restaurant. He strikes up a conversation with me. I panicked and ran for security, called my husband and sat there until he came to pick me up. Security never found the guy I was talking about, as an Asian man in his 30s in a black hoodie and black jeans, average weight and about 5'7", is apparently really common in a crowded mall. Not surprising, really. I quit the job about a week later, and I lodged a formal complaint with the restaurant on other grievances. But I let it slip about the creep to my manager, and he full on freaked out, yelled at our managers, and kinda went nuts that nobody said anything about him. I ran into creep number 1 at the mall one more time, but this time my husband was with me. He started to approach us, but I told my husband who the guy was, and next thing I know, my husband is between the guy and myself, staring this guy down, his phone in hand calling the police. The guy walks by us, bumped my husband's shoulder, and we haven't seen him since. And the store manager from McDump's still thinks I'm paranoid. I am so glad I quit. This happened almost 2 years ago when I was 22. I live in an area outside of Pittsburgh. I was single at the time, and the only thing I wanted to do was have fun and forget about my ex. I should say that I am a very cautious person, verging on the paranoid sometimes. I've never broken a bone. I've never trusted anyone that I didn't know. I learnt my lessons very young, so I felt very equipped to go out by myself to the local bar, because I knew how to make the environment safe. I made fast friends with the bartenders, got along with the regular guys there, and I made it very clear to everyone that I didn't want any sort of romantic attention. I literally just wanted friends and booze. Out of all the men there, one stuck out. Phil. Phil was attractive, funny, and best of all, wasn't interested in me one bit. I had problems having male friends, as all of them always girlfriend zoned me eventually. Phil actually liked having me as a friend. Nothing else. It was awesome. We went to the local bars all the time together. I'd be his wingman, and he would be my bodyguard. When guys hung around me for too long, I wasn't interested if Phil gave a look, and he'd usher the guy away. Perfect setup. We both felt pretty safe no matter where we went, but neither of us saw this one coming. A few months into our friendship, Phil rings me and asks if I wanted to go cosmic bowling. Emphatic yes. I hadn't been since I'd been a preteen, so I was already stoked. I get ready. I did my makeup very bright and expressive, threw on a bright blue shirt and overall shorts, black combat boots, and I'm good to go. The car that pulls up isn't Phil's. I call him cautiously and ask him who is in front of my house, and he says to come on out, that it's a few of his friends. This reassures me, and I head to the rather large Ford SUV. I sit next to Phil, and he introduces me to everyone. The man driving is Jason. His girlfriend is in the passenger seat, and there's some gross kid in a fedora and this goofy hillbilly kid. They say we were going a few towns over. That's where a bar that we're stopping at first was going to be. And then onto the bowling. Cool, I'm up for that. We get into the bar, and it turns out Jason knows the bar owner. Then we drink for free and get a free pizza while we're at it. Can't complain about that. I went up to the front of the building for a smoke and turn around to find Jason walking up behind me. He shakes my hand and apologizes for not introducing himself properly. I said it was fine, and we made casual talk while we smoked. He expressed how much he loved my style. Burlesque rockabilly pinup is how I believe he described me. I thanked him, and he began to tell me about the gay bars he DJs at, and how his girlfriend isn't comfortable with the fact that he's bi. As a pansexual, I can relate to what he's going through. I immediately feel more at ease with him. I tended to trust men who weren't straight more, because I felt as though they were less of a threat, which was a mistake in hindsight. His girlfriend came out and seemed annoyed with me, but I treated her very nicely. As I understand, it's easy to get jealous. We've all been there. Fast forward to bowling. Phil is way too drunk and ends up getting thrown out of the bowling alley. His girlfriend comes to pick him up and apologizes that she can't take me home as well. I tell them it's okay and that I'll be safe. Jason agreed to take me home. Fast forward. Bowling is over and Jason decided to head back to the bar and have the owner reopen after hours for us. I thought it was pretty freaking rad that he had connections like that. They reopened the bar for us, and Jason actually tended the bar. I sat and talked with the owner for a while, whilst Jason fed me alcohol. I kept trying to refuse, but he was really convincing. This shot tastes like a toasted marshmallow, you have to try it. And before I knew it, I was hammered. I don't remember how much, but I do remember getting home safely. And I had made new friends. Very exciting. So Jason adds me on Facebook and invites me to the gay bar the very next day. I'm excited. I'd never been to the one that he worked at, and I trusted him. The months go by and we were fast friends. I started to hang out with him without Phil. He would pick me up, I'd set up his DJ equipment at the bar, and get him whatever he needed. Then party the night away, and he'd take me home. Sometimes his girlfriend would be there. Sometimes she wouldn't be. She didn't seem to like me still, and all the while, I was nothing but nice to her. But it did begin to bother me. Maybe she saw something that I did not. Valentine's Day rolled around, and as I was the local single woman who hated everyone, Jason invited me to a burlesque show that he was going to be doing the lighting for. His girlfriend was going, and so was the hillbilly that was mentioned earlier. 10 minutes into the adventure, I already had to tell off the hillbilly, just because it's Valentine's Day and you're single and going to the same club does not make me your date. The show happens. It's long and eventually I get bored and head to the bar. Jason's girlfriend comes up to me and is silent. She buys 2 shots of tequila and hands me one. She clinks my glass and says, "Good luck." and we take our shots. I realized what she had said as she walked away and thought it odd, and the hillbilly drives me home. I wake up with 46 missed calls, 20-something texts from Jason. I call him, concerned. He doesn't seem upset. He says he just wanted to talk to me, that maybe he had a few too many drinks, and that he was sorry. Okay, I guess, no big deal. He wanted me to come help him take the lights out of the club. I agreed. He picked me up, and something seemed off, but I couldn't place it. His face looked haggard. He talked like his emotions were stretched too thin. We get to the club, and it's locked. He called the owners, and they said that they would be there soon, within the hour. He seems very agitated, and doesn't even want to get out of the car to walk around to the shops. He then ignores my attempts at conversation and calls someone on the phone, an EMT who he's acquainted with. He's asking him for things to steal from the ambulance. It started off innocent enough. Gauze, bandages, tongue depressors, and eventually, do you still have those leather restraints for mental patients? Do you guys have scalpels on the ambulance? One of those big needles, like the huge syringes. What about those pads that soak up fluid? Like the ones you put under patients that are bleeding? The full body ones. The phone was on speaker. I could hear the tension in the man's voice. He told him no to each request, and was getting more and more nervous at this bizarre back and forth. Eventually the man hung up on Jason. I sat there, trying not to seem too conspicuous, and he screamed in my face, "What is your problem now?" I smiled and said nothing was wrong, trying to diffuse whatever was going on with my friend. He laughed nervously and apologized. He said he had a rough Valentine's Day, and he was trying to get stuff for his friend's performance art piece and wasn't having any luck. I trusted him. After we took down the equipment, he took me to the gay bar, and one of the male strippers took a liking to me. Long story short, I may or may not have made a poor life choice that night. Anyway, the bar closes and Jason isn't talking to me. We get into his car and drive a little down the road, and he explodes. What the hell? How could you do this to me, Alice? How could you? He started to cry, swerving all over the road. Don't you have any self-respect? Any respect for me? I told him to mind his own business and pull over. I'm walking home, and if he were to follow me, I would call the police. I took up my phone and dialed 911, but didn't press send. Everything finally made sense, that this was not a person who is my friend, and it's time to be strong and fight. He pulls over and lets me out, silently, and drives off. I call my father for a ride, and he picks me up and asks what happened. I'm not a personal human. I'm not good at sharing. I only told my father that if a man with awful sideburns shows up at the door, bring a gun. Fast forward, I went to another bar with Phil. He was very protective of me after the incident, never leaving me out of sight for long. I walked to the bathroom, which was down a dark hall at this particular establishment, and felt someone latch onto my arm. Jason. Internally, I was furious and scared, but on the outside, I did my best to remain calm. He looked dead inside, nothing in his eyes, just blank. I left Chrissy for you, Alice. I did. You did this to me, but that's okay, really, because we're going to be fine now. You can also sleep with whoever you want. I know how you are, and it doesn't matter if girls or guys or whatever. I'm sorry. I let it get to me before. You're just so amazing. I don't want to lose you. It's okay. It is. You can treat me like garbage if you have to. If it's what makes you happy. We're gonna be together now. Yes, you're perfect. I've always liked winter weddings. I let the rage get the better of me, and with as much venom in my voice as I could manage, I snarled, "No, I am not your girlfriend. I am not, never have been, and never will be attracted to you. You need to let go of me now, you pathetic sack of shit." He blinked and squeezed tighter, and began to try and drag me towards the door. "We're going to Florida now, and there's nothing you're going to be able to do about it." The next thing I know, I fell to the ground with him, and he let go. Phil was on top of him, beating the piss out of him. After he was satisfied, I took him by the shirt and dragged him out the door. The bartender helped me up. A few guys gathered around me and tried talking me to calm me down. Some even apologized that they didn't see the confrontation in the hallway go down. I didn't call the police because I was thinking straight, and I didn't want Phil to get into trouble for beating him within an inch of his life. I don't go out much anymore. My name is Alyssa, and I am sharing with you a very personal story of mine. I can honest to God, right hand on the Bible, say that everything you are about to hear is 100% true. I know everyone who says that makes it kind of hard to believe, but I wish I was just making up a story purely for attention. But these things I am going to tell you truly happened to me when I was younger. I never fully believed in ghosts or anything like that, because I had never witnessed anything paranormal with my own two eyes. So I always had my doubts. I wasn't a total unbeliever, but I suppose you could have considered me a skeptic. But all of that changed when I had to live in a house where I was terrorized by spirits. I've always been very into the paranormal world because it's always piqued my interest, especially when you're listening to other people's ghost stories or watching a scary ghost movie on the TV. It's all very cool to hear when it's not your own story, and it's not you personally having the terrifying things happen to you. I never talk about this to anyone because I hate having to relive the nightmare and pure hell I went through every day while living in an old house of mine. This wasn't easy for me. It sounds silly, but until you have experienced the absolute terror and fear of living in an extremely active house, you won't ever know just how much it can take a toll on someone. I lived in a small 3-bedroom house here in a small little town by the name of Troy in Missouri. It's just a small, out in the middle of nowhere little city. Everyone pretty much knew everyone. Rumors would usually spread very quickly in high school. Just one of those kind of towns. We had a cute little house that was on the corner of Main Street when you walked out the front door and stepped onto the porch. The nice view you got were the massive town's cemetery, right smack dab across the street from our house. So you can only imagine the first thought that came to my mind when we pulled up to the house that we were going to move into. When I saw that the cemetery was no more than 30 steps from our front yard, I thought, great, this place is most definitely haunted. Although at the time, I was just joking with myself. But the cuteness and coziness of the home itself was enough to get my mind off even possibly being haunted. I finally had my own bedroom, after living with my grandma and grandpa at their small cramped house. My sister and I had to share a room over there, as well as with numerous previous houses we lived in. We always shared a room with each other. She is almost 8 years older than I, so I had absolutely no say or had any part in decorating our bedroom. She was the oldest, so she made the rules for how the room should look. She didn't want my Paramore, Papa Roach and Linkin Park posters plastered over the wall. So I had to settle with Lil Wayne, John Cena, and Jersey Shore pictures all over for years. Definitely not my sort of taste in music or television, but we finally had our own bedrooms, so I could actually decorate and have my room the way that I wanted. And nobody could tell me that I couldn't have the things I wanted on my own walls and whatnot. That, and I finally had my own privacy and my own personal area I could go to when I felt I needed to escape or distance myself from my family. It was nice at first. We all seemed to be pretty content with the house and how things were coming along. It was about a week or two after we moved into the house that something weird began to happen. My room was all set up how I wanted. My parents had just finished hanging pictures on the wall and painting and making last-minute adjustments to the place, making it look all nice, and tried to make it feel as much like home as possible. I had come home from school one afternoon, and my parents had both worked together in a big warehouse-type place at the time, so they worked awful hours. They were usually home by the time dinner needed to start being made, but I almost always came home from school to an empty home. I would generally be home alone for a few hours until both my parents came home, or at least until my older sister came home from being out with her friends and partying the night before. I remember one specific day when I came home from school alone. I put my school bag down on the back of the kitchen chairs and went to the fridge to look for something to eat. I went and sat on the couch in the living room and turned on the television and just sat and relaxed for a few minutes, watching whatever stupid reality show I was into around that time, and snacked on my chips. I remember feeling like there was someone watching me from across the room, like as if someone was standing in the corner of the living room, just staring at me. I don't know what it was, but something was urging me to look over in the direction of where I felt this presence. I heard a voice yell in the back of my head, "Look at me." But it wasn't my voice. So when I finally gained the courage to look over that way, I saw these terrifying two glowing red eyes from the shadows, just looking at me. I was so afraid that I was paralyzed from fear. I couldn't talk. I couldn't scream as I wanted to. I couldn't do anything but just stare back at whatever was staring at me. I had never felt that kind of pure, intense fear, to where I was literally paralyzed. It couldn't have been more than 10 to 15 seconds that I was looking at those red eyes from the dark corner, but it felt like hours. I finally pried myself off the couch and sprinted down the hallway into my bedroom, locked the door, and called my mother's cell phone at work. She tried to calm me down as best she could, with just her voice over the phone. But when she realized I was genuinely terrified and sobbing like a damn baby, she told me that her and Dad would wrap up at work and head home. So I stayed locked up in my bedroom until they both arrived 45 minutes later. Little did I know that this was simply the beginning of our story. It was about a month after that incident that I came home from school, yet again all alone, and I had already almost forgotten about what had happened just weeks before, being wrapped up in piles of homework, trying to catch up on my assignments and everything else. It was just kind of pushed into the back of my mind. I sat at the dining room table and was playing games on my laptop when I heard what sounded like my mum's voice calling out my name from downstairs in the basement. I was super confused because I thought she was at work. In fact, I knew she was at work. So I carefully and cautiously got up from the table and inched my way around the corner to where the basement stairs are off the dining room, around the corner a little bit. I then heard my mum again call out my name, Alyssa. But this time it sounded like she was struggling with something, like she needed help carrying laundry baskets up the stairs or something. She just had a sound in her tone of voice, as in that she needed assistance. So I walked down the first couple of steps to where I could kind of peek around the corner to verify if anyone was actually down there. Something just felt off about the voice. Even though it was clearly my mother's voice, every single hair on my body was standing straight on end. I think it knew that something was wrong. I just had a really weird feeling about the situation, and to my shock, I saw nobody down there at all. I booked it back up the steps, grabbed the house phone and ran out the back door. I stood at the end of the driveway and called my dad's cell phone. My heart sank into the depths of my stomach when I heard my mother answer his phone. "Hey sweetie, what's up?" she asked me. I literally remember feeling as if I was almost ready to throw up. I was so scared. If I was actually talking to my mother on the phone, then who was calling my name from the basement? Why did it just sound like my mum? Or what would I have seen if I actually went all the way down the stairs fully? After that experience, I was way too scared to come home from school and be alone after that. So for the next few weeks, my parents had my grandma, who lived a few neighborhoods over, come pick me up from school every day, and either stayed at the house with me until my parents came home, or brought me over to her house where her and my dad would pick me up from over there when they got off work. I felt so much better and much calmer when I had someone there with me in that scary ass house. I didn't feel like anything was there when someone else was there with me. It was almost like whatever was in the house, like scaring me when I was alone and vulnerable. But one day, my grandma wasn't able to pick me up from school because she was a nurse and had gotten called into work at the emergency room. So I found myself all alone in that house until my parents got off work. I don't remember anything that happened that day, but I was most definitely on edge the whole time, waiting on my parents to pull up to the driveway. One night I was sleeping, and I was awoken up out of a dead, deep sleep for some unknown reason. I sat up in my bed, stretched out a little bit and rubbed my eyes. I looked over at my alarm clock and remember it being somewhere around 3:20 a.m. I was so confused as to why I was awake at this god-awful hour of the night. So I sat up at the edge of my bed and was going to go to the kitchen to get something to drink and then go right back to bed. When I was about to stand up and walk out of my bedroom, I heard the sound of heavy footsteps walking up and down the hallway. The whole hallway and kitchen was all hardwood floors, and it sounded like big heavy boots were walking just back and forth from my bedroom door, down to my parents' bedroom, and then back to mine again. It steadily did this for about 2 minutes. I was trying to figure out why one of my parents were awake, and why they were just walking back and forth through the house at such hours of the night. When I got to my bedroom door and went to reach and open the door, I shit you not, my door handle began shaking, like someone was trying to open the door, but it was locked in the handle, jiggling the door handle and jiggling it very violently, causing the entire door to rattle. It scared the absolute hell out of me, and I jumped back and shrieked. I guess my mum, who was the heaviest sleeper in the world, heard me and ran to check what was wrong. I told her what was happening, and she just shrugged it off and tried telling me I was half asleep and that everything was fine, that I was just imagining things. But I know I wasn't imagining things. I know what I saw. I know what I heard, and of course no one believed me. She wasn't awake to hear what I heard, and it made me really angry to know that she did not believe me when I explained it to her. The activity after that died down for a long time. It was so nice to come home and not have to worry about something creepy happening to me. I was beginning to think I was starting to go crazy, since I had experienced what I previously did, and then nothing else had happened after. I was comfortable in my own home. I actually felt safe being there, but all that changed pretty quickly. It was like, just as soon as I thought it was all over, it came back with a vengeance, stronger than it was before. I was taking a shower one evening, and my mother was downstairs doing laundry, and my dad was out in the garage working on his car. I had the bathroom door completely shut, and nobody would have just walked in on me in the shower anyway, with there being only one bathroom in the house. If anyone needed to relieve themselves during my shower time, they would have knocked first before waltzing right on in there. I was just about done showering when I felt a really cold breeze zip past me. It was such a strong breeze that I remember the shower curtain actually moved, as if someone opened up the bathroom door and then shut it really fast, and the wind of the doors closing waved the curtains a little bit. But when I peeked out into the bathroom, no one was there. I hurried up and finished up in there, but I got that immediate feeling of being watched once again. As I went to bend down to shut off the water, I heard this really deep, super creepy, masculine cackle-like laugh, and it was the scariest thing I've heard in my entire life. My whole body was covered in goosebumps. I ran out of there with just a towel wrapped around my body, and went straight across the hall into my bedroom. All I could do was sit there and just cry. I literally was beginning to feel like I was going crazy at this point. Nobody believed me, and I was the only one experiencing this shit. Whatever was in the house was targeting me, and only me. I didn't understand why this was all happening to me, but all I wanted was for it to stop. I hated being in that house all alone, and I didn't want to have this shit happen to me anymore. I was tired of it. I was starting to go into this really deep depression, and I felt so alone. So, I had a friend stay a few nights with me one weekend, and I had told her a lot about what had been going on since I moved in, and she wanted to see what I was talking about. She believed me, but she wanted to see it for herself. She was super into ghosts and the spirit world. I was just really worried that whatever this thing was, wasn't going to do anything while she was here with me, and for her to believe that I was crazy too. We cuddled up together on the living room couch. My parents had gone out with some friends this night in particular, and my sister wasn't there. My two brothers were with my grandma, so it was just my friend and I alone in the house. I remember we were watching the new remake of Friday the 13th. We had a big bowl of popcorn right between us, and I remember the part had come on the movie, and it was a bit of a jump scare. My friend jumped so hard, the entire bowl of popcorn went everywhere. We laughed about it for a solid 5 minutes, and then I went to grab the trash bag and clean up the big pieces while she went to fetch the vacuum cleaner. I didn't see it in the hall closet where it usually was, so I told her it might be downstairs, since my mom was doing some cleaning earlier that morning. So she went downstairs to go look for it, and not even 10 seconds after she'd gone downstairs, I heard her scream. She sprinted up the stairs, and I was standing at the top of the stairs, wondering what she was screaming for, and she ran right into me. She was running so fast up the stairs, she had tears streaming down her face, and I could see the pure terror and just sheer fear in her eyes. I asked her what the hell happened, and what she told me sent chills down my spine. Still to this day, just as I recount this, it gives me goosebumps. She told me she was looking for the vacuum, and when she went to grab it, she heard something in the other part of the basement. So, she went to peek around the corner to see what it was, and she told me she looked around the corner and she saw this thick, black, misty, smoky, human-like figure just floating a few inches off the ground in the back corner of the basement. She said it had absolutely no facial features, but it looked like a normal full-body apparition. It had a head, upper and lower body, legs, and everything a human should have, except no facial features whatsoever. And it just kind of hovered, but it was more like a mist that you could see through. She said when she blinked, it literally vaporized into thin air and vanished. She was so scared, and that's when I heard her scream, and then she ran up the stairs. I just looked at her and told her, this is exactly what I was telling you about. I told her that I was so sorry it happened to her, and that if she wanted to go home, that she could, and I would completely understand. She said no, and that she didn't want to leave me alone after the ordeal. So we kind of just toughed out the rest of the night together, and hid in my bedroom with the door shut and turned the TV off. That night when it was time for bed, we lay down together in my bed and started to drift off to sleep. Somehow, We both woke up and shot up out of bed at the exact same time, from the both of us hearing a weird noise coming from outside my bedroom window. We both just looked at each other and she said, "Did you hear that?" I nodded my head, "Yeah," and we got up out of bed and walked towards the window. What we both heard sounded like a super creepy growling sound. It sounded totally inhuman. It was completely evil. It was a noise that you could only imagine coming from a warthog, and kind of like a lion's roar. I don't even know what words to use that could have described just exactly what we heard, but I pulled my curtain back from the window, and we both peered out into the dark night. What we both saw will forever stick with her and I until the day we die. There was a really weird looking stick type figure. Thing. That's the best way I can describe what it looked like. It was tall, lanky, all black. The way it walked across the street under the glow of the streetlight was very eerie. It took the biggest steps each time it moved, and it was sort of like a cartoonish type movement. Like when a cartoon character tiptoes to sneak up on someone and it takes super wide and totally non-realistic giant steps. That's how this thing was walking across the street. It looked like just a tall, big, thin, squiggly electrical figure. It was by far the craziest thing we've ever seen. We hid back in the bed and didn't come out from under the covers until morning. We still to this day have absolutely no idea what the hell we were looking at that night. Her and I are still very much close friends, and when we hang out together and talk about old memories, if that house is brought up in conversation, we always remember that creature-like thing we saw walking into the cemetery that one night. And even though we can joke and laugh about it now, it still gives us the chills just thinking back to that terrifying night we experienced all of that together. Now that we're much older, we've actually sat down and tried to debunk what we've seen, and we've tried so hard to make sense of it, and we just can't. No matter what we try to trick ourselves we could have seen, we both know exactly what it was and what it was not. Living in that house for the entire year and a half that I did was absolute hell for me. I have been scratched, pushed, had my hair pulled. I woke up in the middle of the night with a burning sensation on my leg, and when I pulled the blanket back to see what was hurting, I could clearly see a bite mark on my ankle. And it wasn't a normal bite mark pattern either. Whatever actually physically bit me very hard and sharp with jagged teeth. The indentations in my skin were just tiny little dots in the shape of a pattern of teeth, like an actual bite mark. So, to even try imagining the things my friend saw in the basement, but with super sharp and pointy teeth, absolutely terrifies me to the core. We moved out of that house after living there for a year and a half. There was one evening, it was a Sunday dinner, and we were having it at my grandparents' house. And somehow, that house got brought up in conversation over the dinner table, and I asked my mum if she remembers the day I called her and asked her about the voice I heard coming from the basement, that it sounded just like her voice calling my name. And she immediately went so pale in the face. I asked her what was wrong, and she said, "Yeah, I do remember that, and I'm sorry for telling you I didn't believe you all those times." I asked her what exactly she meant, and she told me that one day she was sitting at the dinner room table, at the computer, and she heard exactly what sounded like her father's voice, calling her from the basement. She said she heard his voice very distinct and raspy yell, "Stacy!" from down there, while she was all alone in the house one day. She never told me about it when we lived there, and she continued to tell me all about her own personal experiences she had in that house. It made me so mad because everyone in that house literally made me feel like I was going crazy, because I thought I was the only one experiencing this shit happening in that house. But my mum was having the exact same stuff happen to her. She just never told me because she didn't want to scare me any more than I already had been. So she just left it alone and never told anyone about it until years later. I'm now 21 and I still think about this house from time to time. This is the most I've thought about it in a very long time now, and it's almost like every time I bring it up, I get such an off feeling. I don't know how to describe it, but I hate talking about that place. I never had anything paranormal happen to me before moving into that house. I experienced a whole new level of belief after living in that portal to hell. I still drive by it from time to time, and every time I do, it's almost always put back up for rent. People don't stay there any longer than 3 to 6 months. So I guess whatever terrorized me as a kid is still lingering around there to this day. I work in retail, and I have a very unique name. This happened a few years ago, when I first started. I work at a 24-hour convenience store, and at this point, I was working the graveyard shift. I'm used to all types of unsavory folk, but there was this one guy who left me particularly unsettled. It was about 3 a.m. and unfortunately, I was working alone because my coworker decided to call out last minute. The store was dead, and I was packing out a delivery when he walked in. He was a short, stocky guy, a little older than me, probably in his 20s or early 30s. I looked up from the task at hand and greeted him with a friendly smile, and asked him if he needed help with anything. He grinned, looked me up and down with his brown eyes darkening with lust. Yes. Do you sell condoms? I nodded and pointed him to the health and beauty section and proceeded to the registry in order to cash him out. He browses for a little, and typically he picked up a box of Magnums and those herbal sexual supplement pills. So how are you doing tonight? He inquired. I told him I was fine, working hard and anxious to go home. His eyes travelled up and down my body, his eyes settling on my name tag, which is pinned just beneath my left breast. I felt a little uncomfortable. I've never been comfortable with people staring at me, and his eyes lingered longer than necessary. He asked how to pronounce my name. I tell him, and he says it's a nice name politely. I thank him and begin to scan and bag his items, trying to avoid eye contact. He asks if I have a boyfriend, and truthfully, I say yes. He comments that he must be a lucky man, and he wishes he could be in his shoes. Again, I smile uncomfortably, and, as we're supposed to do, ask if he needs anything else. Not unless I can have you, he drawled lazily. Now I'm getting annoyed. I ignore his comment and proceed to tell him his total. He swipes his card, and I complete the transaction and tell him to have a good night. He thanked me and then asks if I'm working by myself. No, my coworker is downstairs doing some paperwork. I lied. Now he grins. No, he isn't. I've been watching you since 12. I haven't seen another person in here at this time. Are you afraid? I frowned. You've been watching me? That's not creepy at all. I tell him that he needs to leave, if he's done shopping. Then I have work to complete. Once again he laughs at me. I thought he was going to argue, but a group of drunken guys walks in and he leaves. Later that night, I check my Facebook and see I have a Facebook request. Guess who it was from? Again, I have a unique name. Only 2 people on Facebook have it. I block him and delete the request. Next morning, I'm going to the subway station. The wanted poster on the token booth catches my eye. The face is familiar. It was the creep from my store. Wanted for sexual assault and battery on East 96th Street. The incident happened more than a month ago, and I hurriedly told my manager, who called the police and gave him our tip. I don't know if he was ever caught, but please, let's not meet outside my store. And I still don't feel comfortable with any name tags. When I was a kid, I lived just down the road from what used to be a small museum. It was on the side of a large university that we used to explore daily. One day, we noticed a man going in the museum. It was the only building on campus we hadn't found a way into, and we realized this might be our only chance. As the man walked through the door that he had just unlocked, we snuck up and slid a large stick behind the door in its frame. When he had vanished from sight, we giddily entered the museum. The first thing we saw was a large dinosaur skeleton, probably a reproduction, but all ours to view nonetheless. We started walking down a dark hallway when my friend grabbed my wrist. I tried to swat her hand away before she whispered, "We have to leave now." I rolled my eyes and turned to see what she was looking at. A man, probably the man who had just entered the building, was standing in a large, lit bathroom with the door open. He was in front of a mirror, with his complete bare back to us. The man was completely naked, not even a sock on him, standing erect in front of the bathroom mirror. I stood in shock for what felt like an eternity, until suddenly his eyes met mine in the mirror, and he grinned. Needless to say, we hightailed it out of there as fast as our legs could manage. We stopped exploring the university after that, and I never told a soul what we had seen that day. I had just moved to a small resort town and was living in staff accommodation at a hotel where I was employed as a chambermaid. All of the cleaning staff were women. The owner only wanted females living in staff accommodation. We weren't even allowed to have men over to our quarters. I'd moved away to escape from a possessive ex-boyfriend, which is really another story in of itself. And I was 19, and had lived a fairly sheltered life due to controlling boyfriends and an overprotective mother. So I was quite naive. I'd never been to a bar before, so when my co-workers invited me to one nearby, I was excited and went along. It was Friday, and the bar was full of people. A rather attractive man approached me, and we started up a conversation about paranormal stuff and religion. Right up my alley. He too had moved there for work. He was a cook, and was given a room in the hotel he was working at. which happened to be only a minute away from the bar. Our conversation was quite interesting, and he seemed nice, and the bar was starting to get rowdy. So when he invited me back to his place to talk, I said sure. This was incredibly stupid, I realize now. As soon as he opened the door to his room, he was trying to get me into his bed. It hadn't been apparent before how drunk he was, but suddenly he could barely form a coherent sentence and was slurring and mumbling all over the place, posing on his bed like Kate Winslet in Titanic, though with his clothes on, thankfully, and drunkenly inviting me to join him. I got the hell out of there. I reconnected with my co-workers at the bar. One was talking to a tall man, and she introduced me to him, saying he was a friend of hers, before leaving us to go onto the dance floor. We talked for some time, and I felt safe with him, because he was a friend of my co-workers, and he offered to give me a ride home. Before you start thinking that I'm completely naive, I should mention that in this town, there was only one taxi. The driver of the taxi was known by the townspeople to molest his fares, to the point where almost every woman, and a few men, who had lived there a few years had a story about him. Also, my co-workers were all hammered, so my options were 1. Late night driving on a windy road with a drunk driver. 2. Riding with a taxi driver who will likely sexually assault me. 3. This guy. And 4. Walking home alone 6 kilometers through forested areas with bears and cougars. Option 3 seemed like my best bet. As we went to his car, I started telling him about the guy before, gauging his reaction. He was sincerely upset for me about it, which made me feel more confident in him. If he was a creeper, he'd be making excuses for the guy, right? He invites me over to the house he's staying at, saying that it sounds like I've had a rough night, and he's not trying to hit on me. It's just that the people he's house sitting for have an amazing home theatre and a ton of movies, and that we could watch something good. I'm pretty keyed up from the night, so movies sound like a good idea to me, and I go along with him. We get in, and he shows me the living room. There is a big, awesome home theatre, and a huge crate full of DVDs. Pick whichever one you want, he says. I browse through the collection. There is a lot of romantic comedies, but I worry that if I choose one of them, he'll think I'm coming on to him. I grabbed Silence of the Lambs instead, because not a sexy movie, and also I've never seen it. Right at the point where Hannibal Lecter is talking about eating someone's liver with fava beans, the guy puts his hand up my skirt, because, I don't know. I am supposed to be hot and bothered by cannibalism or something. I guess I may as well have picked a romantic comedy, for all the good of picking horror movies did me. My memory of the rest of the night is pretty hazy. I got him off me, he chased me through the house. It was under construction, so there were big, thick plastic sheets hanging from the walls. It was a large house that I wasn't familiar with, so I had no idea how to get out, and I didn't know the town well enough to get myself anywhere, but lost once I did. We were on a tiny road off another tiny road off another tiny road in the middle of the forest. Basically, I ran and he chased me. Eventually, I found myself in a bedroom that had a door that locked. I locked it and leaned against the door crying, as he pounded on the other side of the door yelling. After a while, something weird came over me. I opened the door and demanded that he take me home. "Oh yeah, I'll take you home tomorrow," he said. "No, you will take me home now." I don't think I've ever used that tone of voice before or since. I don't think I could do it again if I tried. Somehow, with those 7 words, I managed to instill enough fear into him that he immediately took me home in his car. It was a messed up night. When I went to work the next day, I found out that my coworker wasn't actually friends with the guy in the first place. She'd never met him before. She was just trying to flirt with him. Idiot. Living in an area like Portland, Oregon, you learn to expect a certain amount of weirdness taking public transit. Being a woman living in any major city, you expect it. At one point, more likely in your life, you of course expect to encounter perverts or creeps. It goes with the territory, even if it shouldn't happen at all. This encounter happened a few years ago, but I still remember it. It changed my behavior when wandering alone at night, which is significant for me, since I am an introverted night owl who prefers graveyard shift and shopping at 24-hour stores. In 2008, I was working at a call center, and my shift at the time had me clocking in at 7 and leaving at 4 a.m. Most nights, I would leave with a couple of friendly co-workers, and we would wait for the Blue Line train to roll through, usually only a 10-minute wait on weekdays. At that point, all but one would part ways with me. Most of my co-workers lived closer to Gresham, and at the time, I lived in Hillsborough. We were pretty good acquaintances by proxy of being on the same team and taking the same train, but not quite friends. She lived further down than I did, so she usually sat with me until I got off. It was sometime in July, I forget the specific day, but it was hot enough, even after dark, that I opted to go to work in a spaghetti strap top and shorts rather than my usual t-shirt and jeans. The call center was casual dress, doubly for graveyard shift, since our manager didn't care what we did so long as it didn't get back up to upper management or HR. That night, I was alone for the walk to the max, since half of my team had called in, my train buddy included. I didn't think much of it, aside from being pissed off and exhausted from the extra workload. I suspected they all bailed to attend a party a co-worker had advertised the week before. When my train came by, I honed in on a deserted section and claimed a forward-facing seat by the operator terminal, intent on ignoring the world and catnapping my way home. Someone getting on with a bike joined me out of my daze because of the obnoxious clatter they made when people positioned them on the wall hooks. Apparently, scowling is considered a form of flirtation because the bike owner made eye contact. He smirked and sauntered his way over to take a seat right across from me. Irritated because the car was deserted aside from two people on the opposite end, I ignored him and stared out of the window, longingly waiting for my stop. After a few minutes of being ignored, he leaned across the aisle in order to get my attention. "Hey, good morning. You work around here?" Polite enough, but I grunted non-committally in return, not in the mood for small talk. This, however, only seemed to encourage him. After a brief pause, he tried again less subtly. "You're pretty." It's not the first time I've had people hit on me, but generally, when I put on my bitch face, they leave me alone. So it made my skin crawl uncomfortably to have it ignored. My disdained frown didn't seem to register, as he took my silence as an invitation to slip over to the seat directly beside me. blocking me in. This sent up red flags and wailing sirens in my head, even aside from the very obvious way he leaned in and peered, clearly trying to see down my shirt. I finally found my voice, leaning away. I am not interested. Any normal human being at that point would have realized they were being creepy, apologize, and move seats. Not this guy. This guy smiled, reached into a pocket, and pulled out his phone. I was prepared to physically kick him out of the seat if he pointed the camera at me. So I was dumbstruck for a minute when he calmly asked, "What's your number, sweetie?" It was as if he wasn't registering my reactions as unusual. Before I could think to respond, he glanced at me expectantly. "By the way, where's your friend tonight?" My blood ran cold, and I felt a little panicked. I'm realizing he'd clearly watched me on previous nights. But I didn't recognize him, as I had come to recognize other regulars on the morning trains. Seeing a stop come up, I stood abruptly. "This is my stop." That finally made him frown, but he switched back to his original seat without comment. At having me loom over him, I am 5'7" without heels. The second thing was there wasn't enough room to move without touching him. I made a beeline for the nearest door, not caring that it was still a good 3 stops from where I needed to be. I was in such a rush to get away from the uncomfortable situation that I didn't register the sound of someone taking a bike off a rack. I intended to just wait for the next train, but as I was walking towards the kiosk to look at the schedule, I finally noticed the clicking sound of the bike gears behind me. Too afraid to draw attention to the fact I'd been lying about my stop, I stared straight ahead and kept walking to the platform. It was deserted, as I knew it would be for a while before the next train came by in either direction. This stop was one that I wasn't familiar with, but I recalled that not far from the shopping centre and a few apartment complexes, I walked purposefully and tried to pretend like I hadn't noticed that I was being followed. Since he made no more advances, I got the sick feeling that he intended to follow me home. I stuffed my hands into my pockets to feel for my phone and a small pocket knife I kept out of paranoia for just such a situation. I considered calling 911, but since nothing physical had happened yet, I knew they wouldn't take it seriously, and I didn't want to provoke him with such an obvious gesture. The walk seemed to take forever though. I knew the shopping centre was only a quarter of a mile from the stop. The stores and parking lots were deserted, but it was situated on the corner of a busy intersection, and a little further down, I could see a lit gas station sign. So I walked a bit faster. I must have looked as freaked out as I felt, because when the attendant spotted me through the front window, he came out from behind the counter. When I walked in, he was looking past me. "Friend of yours?" I shook my head emphatically and explained that the man had been following me from the train. The attendant nodded in understanding, discreetly going back behind the counter and picking up the phone whilst I made my way to the back of the store, staying close to an employee-only door by the coolers. I pretended to browse the aisles as I listened to the attendant talk to who I could only assume was his manager, finally turning around to see just where the creep was. My stomach dropped. He was standing just outside the window, smiling, staring straight at me. He made no move to follow me inside, but he looked prepared to wait, more than a little scared. I made my way to the counter. The attendant looked annoyed as he hung up the phone. My manager is on the way. There's not much I can do until then, since he hasn't done anything. You can stay here, and if he comes in I can ask him to leave. It should get busier soon. He offered the last feebly, unsettled as well. Throughout the wait, the man didn't budge. He stood there smiling and blinking. It was a tense few minutes until a car finally pulled up. A heavy-set older Latino man jumped out. He paused for a moment to assess the situation before approaching the creep. I couldn't hear exactly what he said, but it sounded like the manager was pissed, and the smile finally vanished. I thought I was going to be sick from relief after a few brief moments, as the man hopped back on his bike and pedaled away. Shaking a little as the adrenaline started to wear off, I thanked them both and explained what had happened on the train. The manager offered to drive me home, but stranger danger on high alert, I declined. I did accept an offer to walk me back to the Max station, and he waited with me, keeping an eye on the platform until the next train came. I made it home without further incident, but I was jumpy and paranoid at passing bikes for a good long while afterwards. I stopped going out at night and instead tolerated sleep deprivation on my weekends to shop during the day. After my train buddy heard what happened, we exchanged numbers and we let each other know when we'd been calling in sick. I never quite felt secure in my home or at work after that, just wondering how long that creep had been watching me and my co-worker without us noticing. I declined to renew my lease when it came due, and had a co-worker with a car help me move. Shortly after that, I quit work and found a new job on a bus line. So, creepy, eco-conscious Max Line stalker, let's not meet again, because I bought a taser. I was drunk as hell. I'm walking home from a bar. Between the bar and my house is a pretty large pioneer cemetery. Lots of old graves, big trees, and generally a creepy place. I love the cemetery for the historic graves and quiet, and often take walks through there. In my drunk-ass state of mind, I see the cemetery as a shortcut home. I start climbing the 10-foot chain-link fence, swing a leg over the top, and prepare to jump onto the grass. My pants get stuck. I fall, and I'm literally hanging there, pants ripped, and I fall face first onto the ground. I start walking down the path that leads towards the entrance of the cemetery, which is across from my house, limping and holding my shoulder while drunkenly cursing my foolishness. I hear a noise and look up. It's a teenage couple. They're about 10 yards ahead of me standing in the moonlight. They flip the hell out, screaming, turning around and running full bore out of there. I can't stop laughing and take my time hobbling home. As I'm approaching the entrance, I notice a car pulling into the cemetery. I suspect it's the cops or someone coming to investigate the screaming, so I duck behind a large headstone. The car is full of more teenagers, and these ones are out for a ghost hunt, packing cameras and audio recorders and the like. Well, screw it. I've already spooked 2 people. I wait until they've walked about 20 yards into the darkness, and I start tossing pine cones while staying hidden. The first pine cone hits the gravel path behind them. The next 2 ricochet off a tree and fly into the graveyard. All the kids freeze and look at each other. Perfect. I toss one more cone and start to make the best evil cackling laugh I can imagine. The kids flip out, run to the car, peel out and flee. I stumble home, laughing my ass off, and enjoy a celebratory joint. I know I'm an asshole, but I just had to mess with those kids. I mean, come on. How could you not? When I was around 5 or 6, we were living in a rented house that seemed normal enough. But strange things started to happen shortly after we moved in. My older brother liked doing these huge 500-piece puzzles that he would put them together on the floor of our bedroom, and they started getting messed up during the night. Everyone naturally assumed it was me, but it wasn't. Not long after that began, I started to have really bad nightmares about a woman in her early 20s. She was in a white cotton nightgown with violet flowers on it. She had very long, wavy, tangled black hair and was swaying from the ceiling light, and she would stare at me with a look of pure hatred. It got so bad that my parents took me to a therapist who said I was having night terrors. About a month after the night terrors started, we moved to another house suddenly. My parents claimed it was because they found a house closer to my father's work, and just like that, the night terrors stopped, and my brother's puzzles were being left intact. It wasn't until 15 years later, while visiting the family, that I discovered the truth. My mother was talking to one of our neighbors about my night terrors, and said that another family with a little girl rented the place a few years before us. She had the exact same night terrors, right down to the nightgown with the pretty purple flowers. The neighbor also mentioned that no one seemed to stay in that house for more than a year. My mum thought it was too much of a coincidence, so she started asking around and found out from an elderly couple in the neighborhood that a young woman had killed herself in the house in the early 60s, as my experience took place in the early 80s. My mother went to the library and looked through the microfiche and found the news articles. It turns out that the girl in her early 20s had mental health issues and was being cared for by her parents, had gone into my bedroom in the middle of the night and hung herself from the ceiling light. I never got to see the picture that they had of the girl in the paper, but my mum said she had very long black wavy hair, and I'll never forget those eyes burning through me and her face distorted in silent rage. This happened to me 2 years ago. It was my first month on the job, and I work night security at this pretty interesting place. For the record, I still work there, and have more strange stories that perhaps I'll share in future. I am a 38-year-old male. I've worked security jobs for most of my life, and of course the graveyard shift. I was an event security guard for various well-known concert venues for years, so I've seen my fair share of strange things and crazy people. In other words, I don't scare very easily, and hardly ever go into panic mode when a crisis comes up. The place I currently work is a resort-style apartment complex. To get the layout, there are 3 floors of apartments, with 50 units on each floor. This place takes up one city block, with a golf course in the back, indoor swimming pools, hot tubs, and a small movie theatre. You name it, this place has it. Most of the residents are retired doctors, lawyers, and otherwise rich. There are some younger people that live here as well, stockbrokers and real estate agents and so on. Some just use their apartment in the summer and leave as soon as the snow falls. It is located in a well-known tourist town in the United States. The building itself has 12 exits on the first floor. The doors are locked at 11 p.m, but you can exit, but you can't get in unless you go to the front of the building and ask to be buzzed or pick up the phone box next to wherever exit you're at. It will ring and the company cell phone will pick up, with me on the other end, for me to let you in. The front lobby is set up much like a hotel, with sliding glass doors, which I lock when I start my shift. In the middle of the building on the first floor are two big slider doors, which I also lock. They lead to the private parking lot. The parking lot itself is gated, and you need a code to get in. It was midsummer, and while it's never really hot here, tonight was an exception. It was still very warm after the sun had set. I came in 10 minutes to 11 in order to start my shift. We have a routine to hand off the keys, event log, and phone to the next person on duty. I am the only security person here at night. My co-worker, who was leaving, told me the side iron gates that lead to the parking lot are open on one side because they were stuck. This is nothing new, and they do often get jammed. She told me the repair people would be in tomorrow sometime to fix them, but just to do some extra patrol outs there tonight. This place sits across the road from a public park, and while the area is pretty decent, the park tends to breed druggies and homeless at night, who sometimes like and try and wander on property or cause trouble. My night started out as uneventful. As a security guard in this place, we only have pepper spray, a large flashlight, keys and a company cell phone to call 911 if need be. We are told not to confront with bodily harm, nor can we detain anyone. We are simply eyes and ears, and to call the police if something does come up. Of course, you can defend yourself if you need to, but in all cases, if you are in danger, call the police. That is our company policy. Basically, I am to walk the grounds and floors for anyone suspicious. Watch the cameras in the security office, which is in the lobby, and otherwise try and stay alert. If a resident calls for maintenance, I would take the information down into the computer for a day shift, or if a resident called with a security issue, I would attend to it. Pretty easy enough job, I thought. I locked the doors of the parking lot and the lobby doors. I did a sweep of all the floors and then found myself back at the desk. It was really quiet, and it rolled around to 3 a.m. I had just sat down to eat my lunch when the company's cell phone rang. The caller ID let me know it was from one of the outside call boxes. I picked it up and said, "Thank you for calling. This is Security Officer James. How may I be of service to you?" All I heard was someone breathing heavy. I glanced at the cameras, and I could see the shadow of a figure standing just out of reach from the door and camera view. All I could see is the open call box and the metal cord from the phone. I ask again, "How may I help?" The man started to breathe heavier and laugh, then silence. It was one of those laughs you hear in a movie when the lunatic is about to do something terrible. I got up from my chair and started to walk out of the office and the door when it rang again. This time it was from call box number 2, which was further down. I quickly looked at the camera and see this large figure in a hooded jacket. I knew this was strange, as it was very warm outside. He was holding a black bag in his hand, but had his back to the camera. "I'm coming for you, and you are going to die." This voice said that in a deep and raspy tone. He hung up before I had the chance to say anything. Then the phone rang again. This time I picked up, and before he could speak, I let him know that the cops were on their way, and to leave the property now as he is on camera. He tried the doors, and both were locked. This time, he was at yet another call box. This guy had to be running at top speed to make it to the next call box, as they are all a good distance between each other. "I can see you. Are you ready to die? The cops won't make it here on time," the guy said. I spoke loudly and pretended like I was talking to another security officer and asked him to send another 3 security guards and such to the location, and that police are dispatched. The guy slammed the phone down loudly against the call box receiver, and I watched him on camera take off into the darkness of the park area. I figured it scared him off. I was going to call the police, but honestly, the location of this place, it would take them at least 15 minutes to get here, and I figured this guy was just some tweaker from the park. I scanned the cameras and walked the back lot just to be sure that no one was there. I had my pepper spray in my hands just in case, but no one was out there. I returned to my desk and wrote down what happened in the incident log. About a half hour passed, and I had finished lunch, and just was about to do the rounds when the phone rang again. This time, it was from an unknown number. I thought it would be a resident calling for a repair issue or something. I picked up and said my normal line. "Where are the cops? I don't see them, but I see you," the guy said. Shit, it was that guy again. I scanned the cameras and did not see anything. I went to the front door to look out, and there was nothing but darkness and a few front floodlights on. "I know you're alone, and you're going to die soon," he said. I basically told him to get stuffed and hung up. I called the non-emergency number to 911 and let them know what was going on. The dispatcher said she would send out a car to check the area and to make contact with me. Next thing I hear is a loud thud against the glass window to the day manager's office, which sits across from the security room. Another 3 loud bangs. I run to the door and unlock it. I pull up the shades and shine my flashlights through the window into the darkness. And I catch the face of this hooded man. He looked to be about 40, with long, stringy hair poking down, and these wild eyes. He looked right at me and grinned before slamming his head into the window and tried to break it. I started yelling at him and told him the cops are coming and to get the hell out of here. That's when he pulled the biggest damn butcher's knife I've ever seen and made a slicing motion, like he would use it to cut my throat. This guy must be crazy, and was more than likely on some drugs. He continued slamming his body against the glass, trying to break it. He used his head to try and break the window, but managed to bust his head open, so the window now had his blood all over it. I backed out of the office and locked the door to it. I then decided to wait for the cops, as this guy was out of control, and my pepper spray wasn't going to stop him, and the last thing I wanted was to handle a bloody crazy person. He then ran to the nearest side door and took the call box phone off the hook. He then ran to each call box and removed all the phones, which caused my company cell phone to ring and jam up the line. This guy had to be on meth or something, because he's ran as fast as I could imagine. I watched the camera and noticed to my horror the sliding door to the garage was now open. Now it was common for residents to go out to their cars and unlock the door themselves. It's just a sliding lock, like the kind in department stores. But this is the last thing I need, with this nut job running around. I sprinted across the building and took a shortcut through a couple of banquet rooms to make it into the garage. As I was doing so, I saw that crazy guy running up the garage pathway. I slid that door as fast as I could and locked it before he got to the entryway. He then slammed his body into the glass, over and over, but the door did not move. I locked the second set of doors in case he got through the outside ones. He would at least be trapped or slow him down. I reached for my pepper spray, thinking maybe he would just leave, and yelled, "The cops are here." He started to laugh and howl, and then held the knife up against him before running into the darkness of the parking garages. I called the cops on my personal cell phone to let them know that the man had a knife. The dispatcher told me the cops would be there shortly, and I let her know what had happened. I made my way to the front again and locked myself in the security office. At least this place had no windows, and I could watch on camera. I heard another loud thud and a bang, and realized he was at the front lobby doors trying to get in. I was hoping the cops would roll up any minute, but they didn't, and while it probably didn't take them that long, it felt like forever at this point. The guy was standing at the lobby doors with the knife in hand. He faced the camera, and by this time his hoodie had fallen back. He was bald-headed, with wild, long, stringy, crazy hair on the sides of his head. His eyes were huge, and I will never forget that grin on his face as he mouthed to the camera, "Die, die," while making stabbing motions with the knife, blood running across his face from slamming into the glass, and then he ran into the darkness. About 5 minutes later, the cops showed up. They sent one officer. He asked me what the guy looked like, and I told him. I have camera footage. He drove through the area at first and shined a spotlight. The cop returned to tell me he couldn't find anyone, and he had driven around the entire block and the area behind the golf course. I showed him the footage and printed out a picture from the camera. The cop said he didn't see any signs of the guy, and that he would patrol the area and to call back if he came again. It was now nearly 5 a.m. when the cop left. I waited until 6, when it was daylight and people were starting to get out and about, before I walked around and hung up all the phones from the call boxes. The guy literally took all 12 phones off the hook. When my manager came in during the morning shift at 8 a.m, I told her what happened, and she said they would keep an eye out and have a meeting to let everyone who worked there know and be aware. They had an extra security guard on my shift for 2 weeks after, but the guy never returned. The cops never found the guy or who he was. So crazy bloody guy with the knife. Let's not meet again. This is a traumatic encounter I had in May of 2012. It was a Saturday night, and I went out to a bar with friends. We were dancing and being obnoxious, of course, and this dude kept looking at us. I didn't pay him much mind. He was cute, but I was not in the mood to talk to some strangers. Anyway, the night progressed, and one of my friends gave him my number, without permission by the way, and he and I are no longer friends due to his disregard for anyone but himself. So, the dude texted me. Okay, I responded politely, and we ended up having some decent conversations. We had a lot of common. Music taste, movie taste, general witty banter. I'm including this so you understand why I chose to go out with this stranger. 2 weeks later, we met up in the same bar. We hung out, had some beers, and he was drinking pretty excessively. My dad is an alcoholic, so that is always a red flag for me. He seemed to be handling himself well though, and a few of my friends showed up for support and potential protection. A few hours into the date, he told me how pretty I was. Ah, I thought, that's always nice to hear. We were sitting out on the deck, drinking and enjoying the evening. I hadn't yet realized my friends went into the bar, and no other patrons were outside. He didn't stop there though. This dude leaned close in my ear. I could feel the hot breath, and it was not a turn on. I could smell the shitty Bud Light on his breath, mixed with garlic or something. Then he started to whisper, "You remind me a lot of my ex." Ah, shit. I'd already been losing interest in this situation, but that feeling was growing immensely. Then he continued, "I thought she was a spy, you know, for the government. I used to have bad schizophrenia. Psychiatrists are bullshit though, so I self-medicated with OxyContin and shit." I pulled back, but his arms were around my shoulders and pulled me back. I felt my ear knock against his teeth, and my whole body grew numb with fear. This was when I noticed we're alone. "I'm gonna go use the restroom," I said. I needed out. Fight or flight kicked in, and he looked strong. "I'm not done," he said, squeezing tighter on my shoulder. "Just let me tell you this." I pushed my elbow against his ribs, casually but forcefully. I didn't want this to escalate, but I needed to get the hell out. "I really have to pee quick. I'll come right back." I put my other hand on the bench that we were sitting on, using the force to try and propel me up. This guy pulled me back down and chuckled, like it was cute or something. "Sorry," he said. "Just stay, I have something important to tell you." I remember he started rubbing my arm, like he was trying to soothe me into complacency. So I screamed loud. "Let me go, get off of me!" I screamed words I hoped would alert, and that I wasn't a drunken loudmouth. "What the hell, seriously, like what?" he asked. I remember the smell of garlic had gone away, and the alcohol was all that was left. It triggered even more panic in my eyes, as it was reminiscent of my father's alcoholic outbursts. "Ashley? Ashley!" I screamed out for my best friend, and still no one came. It was one of those patios that fenced in, with a large, thick metal door to get back into the bar. There were no windows to see into the bar either. I still didn't struggle physically. I worked with individuals who had severe aggression and behavioral disorders, and have been trained to believe that the more you physically fight, the more it escalates. The voices aren't so bad anymore. I medicate with alcohol now, he shouted. He didn't sound mad though, he seemed confused, like he didn't understand why I was so incredibly done with it. My ex, she may have been a spy. I stabbed her by accident. Kind of. She left me. And you look like her, and I like that, okay? I just care about you. I want to be with you. He said all these things. His voice calmed through that conversation. The smell of garlic came back, and I felt my body grow a limp in resignation. And then the door opened. A loud clunk as the metal hit the brick. Laughter. Ashley's laughter. I looked up, and Ashley's laughter stopped. Her body still. Get the bouncer, I said calmly. I'm so grateful I de-escalated situations for a living. It probably saved me from that getting any further. Dude, let go of me. You're still a bitch, he said. You're gonna rot. At that point, I stood and ran, or walked fast, or did a silly slow run. I don't know. The adrenaline was pumping, and nothing seemed real. I ran towards my friend. The four of us ran into the bar right behind Ashley, who already had the bouncer with her. After I saw Ashley with the bouncer, I sat on a stool and fell apart. I was sobbing, and shaken, and heaving. The bartender gave me so many napkins to blow my nose with, eventually giving me an entire sack of them. Everyone had heard about the situation, so nobody bothered me. My friend stayed with me that night. Everything was a huge blur after I got out of his grip at the bar. I don't remember talking to the bouncer or the owner who banned him for life. I don't really remember writing the encounter in my journal or eating an entire pizza by myself, but I did. The next day, I changed my phone number immediately. I avoid the areas where the bar was located, and I really don't go out much at all. In my head, I went through the worst case scenarios, and that only escalated the anxiety from my encounter. My therapist helped a lot though, but still, dude from the bar, let's not meet. Seriously. There was a crazy cat lady 2 houses down from my childhood home. Rumors were that she killed her husband. She had something like 50 cats in a small cage in the backyard, and even more are coming and going in and out of her house 24 hours a day. She died, and they nailed up all of the cat doors that the cats were using, and eventually the cats disappeared. Some friends and I, a little while later, were bored one day and decided to break into the house. We wanted to see what this woman was like. What we discovered was a bit surprising. She was a super hoarder. She had piles of magazines, milk jugs, loads of random shit everywhere. So, we go into the basement, and I kid you not, there are at least 100 mummified corpses of cats. No live ones, and none that had died recently enough to be juicy. But the smell was horrific. We got out of there in a hurry. A couple of weeks later, the authorities actually deemed the house a biological hazard. They sealed it up in a bubble and took it apart piece by piece. I have always regretted my decision. My roommate is working her first overnight shift at some popular burrito place from 11 p.m. to 4 a.m. in the entertainment district part of the city. Basically, an area full of strip clubs, bars, clubs, and rowdy douche nozzles, and meth heads. We get lots of those here too. So you can probably imagine the agonizing evil that awaits to be bestowed upon this innocent little burrito goddess. Needless to say, this 5'0" microscopic Asian girl was scared out of her mind. Being the heroic, almighty guardian defender for miniature Asian girls like myself, I gave her my dog spray, as pepper spray is illegal where I'm from. Since Burrito Goddess didn't know how to use it, I decided to elegantly demonstrate by spraying the gassy liquid like hell through an open window, figuring it would work flawlessly. As the butt of my index finger released the pressure from the button, I heard a soft whisper above from the heavens. 'Twas at that moment when God himself whispered, "Now is time you pay for all your sins, you filthy wretch." Before I could even think about running away to escape the calamity that would soon follow, a gush of wind, with the force of a quintillion oxen, blew back my way, causing a mist of spicy hell to enter my delicate lungs. Burrito Goddess watched in horror, as from afar I felt the wrath of 1,000 suns baked in chili peppers beyond the Scoville scale, while desperately gasping for air and wheezing to violent degrees. I found out that despite popular belief, Google doesn't have answers to everything, like how to relieve yourself after inhaling dog spray, for example. But hey, will she be safe during her night shift tonight? Absolutely. Did I once again fulfill my duties as the heroine and saviour of puny Asian girls everywhere? Indubitably. Have my lungs yet recovered from the lethal misty breath of Satan? Nay. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I really hope that you did enjoy tonight's compilation. If you did, be sure to hit that subscribe button and press the little bell icon to be notified every time I post. Don't forget to drop that like and leave a comment with your thoughts on the video, as it is always read and truly appreciated. If you have a story that you would like to share to potentially be read on Mortis Media, all that you will need to do is send me an email, or alternatively drop it to my Reddit. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.